All right, we'll let everyone file in now. Welcome everyone to the webinar. Today we'll be covering the Cultural PR Playbook, Amplify Brands and Empower Connections with Melissa Vela-Williamson. We're super excited to have you here. Oh,
Happy to be here.
There we go. I was gonna say we've got the mute. The mute is in effect.
Yeah, I was trying to be very mute respectful, and then I forgot to unclick it. So thank you all for joining in. Come on in, Samantha. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yes, you too. And something we love to do before we get started, as we're seeing lots of new people file in, is figure out where everyone's calling in from. So if you want to share in the chat, we'd love to hear where you're coming from. We usually get people all over the country and the world lately. I'm currently in Germany for the time being. Where are you calling in from, Melissa?
Oh, I'm based in San Antonio, Texas. I wish I was where I'm going to be next week, which is near Cancun, Mexico for vacation. But right now I'm in San Antonio and it's hot right now.
Ooh, I believe it. It's really
Yeah.
starting to warm up all over the place. All right, we've got some California folks coming in. New Hampshire, Tampa, Cleveland. Awesome. Really spanning the US today. Welcome, everybody. If you haven't had a chance to share where you're calling in from, I'll give a few more minutes for that and we will get going. While we wait, we will go ahead and launch a fun poll just to get an idea where everyone is at the beginning of the conversation. The question we have is, have you worked in multicultural, ignore this double multicultural, marketing or PR before? Just use that, but you get the gist. We want to see what your starting point is, if you're brushing up on knowledge, just digging in for the first time, really where we can meet with you today and focus the conversation. So we're getting lots of answers trickling in. For those of you who are just now signing on, we're doing a quick poll about multicultural marketing and PR. All right, we got bulk of the answers. Okay, few more. Give a few more seconds. Any predictions, Melissa, what the breakdown will be?
I feel like it was going to be majority. Ooh, no, because I think the audience is always so different. I have a lot of people who've not really tried this strategy or been, exposed to it in their work strategically. And then those who are really in that mix who focus. So let's say maybe the 80-20 rule applies to most things. So let's try to say 80% has and 20% hasn't. What do you think, Samantha?
Okay. I would also lean towards more yes than no, just because anything I mean, from my perception, I guess, of the topic, I think a lot of people and groups would like to say they have, even if they haven't. It can be very generalized. It can be confusing. So yeah, I would say most would consider, especially with professional training in PR, that they've at least touched on it in some capacity. Let's see what we've got. Any others too? We'd like to hear if there's another answer. I'm going to go ahead and end it and see what we got. Okay, so we see you are on track. So 56 yes, 44 no. Okay, actually pretty good split there.
Yeah, pretty even. And I think that that's a great question because to just get a jump on our conversation, I'll say whether you have been told you're working on that or whether you realize you're working on multicultural communications, if you're working with humans, you're working in multicultural communication and marketing.
Right. So even more so than I was thinking, it all necessarily counts. I guess it just matters how you tailor that and what you do with it. So we'll go ahead and get into the topic. I'll reintroduce for anyone who signed on a little bit later here. We're going to be talking about your cultural PR playbook and how you can start really to amplify brands and empower connections. And so excited to have our special guest today. We have Melissa Vela-Williamson, the founder of MVW, mouthful, Communications. And among that, she is an accredited, internationally recognized public relations expert, national industry columnist, podcast host, and author. So Melissa is all over the place and an expert on today's topic. So it's really great to have her. She has approximately 2 decades of hands-on experience with multicultural and integrated communications. She serves as a consultant, trainer, and account director for her boutique firm, has directed communication initiatives for over 100 brands with a specialty in nonprofits. With unique experience in internal comms and DEI, Melissa leverages her PR expertise and acumen as a certified diversity professional to create social good. So her book, which we'll talk all about today in great detail and give you lots of previews and a chance to ask live questions, which is amazing. Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials, all pros should know, was published just back in October of 2022. So it's honestly still brand new in the world of books and being adopted into curriculums already. So that's really exciting. And it's quickly become an Amazon bestseller. So thank you so much, Melissa. I can't wait to talk with you today.
Thanks, Sam. I'm excited, really excited to be here with you.
Awesome. And for those who haven't met me, I am the marketing manager here at Propel PRM for about 2 years now. It's great to see those of you who are returning and lots of new faces today as well. So before we get into the meat of today, I'll just go ahead and summarize what we'll be covering in case you want a refresher. So we'll start off by really broadly taking a look at the intersection of culture and PR, what that looks like, what cultural strategy even is beyond any sort of jargon or confusing terms that you end up hearing. We'll talk all about the new book, how to start your own cultural strategy in the right direction and operationalize that. Go ahead and add any questions that you have in the chat as we discuss today, because we'll leave time at the end for those and you'll be able to ask them live, which is always very exciting. Before we get into the topic, I'll just go ahead and give you some background about Propel for anyone who's new here. We are a PR software company, first one built by PR pros for PR pros. And our leader, Zach Cutler, had his own agency for about 9 years before starting Propel. And then he never really quite found his own tool stack he was looking for in his agency life. So he sold his agency and started Propel. Now we've been on a mission for the past few years to democratize PR and storytelling for the masses through our different PR tools that we offer. Most excitingly and most new, we've been working on some AI technology, which has been, as you might imagine, crazy, exciting, all the things. So if you want to check those out, they're available on our website. So enough about Propel and myself. We will get into it. So, as you all know, culture and PR are two powerful forces that should ideally meet and, like Melissa mentioned, always work together in shaping perception, influencing comm strategy, and foster meaningful connections more than anything in today's landscape. But unfortunately, we see a lot of brands miss the mark here. You see those disasters all the time, PR fails, if you will, where things don't quite resonate or actually end up offending and having the opposite effect. So this is a very important starting point for us to go ahead and take a look at the broad understanding of culture and PR, where they actually meet and what that looks like. So let's go ahead and get into it. Melissa, our guest today, she writes a lot about people and their culture, which is not always so typical in PR, I would say, or at least not done always well. So in your opinion, Melissa, what role does culture play in PR? Just broadly getting us going here.
Sure, Sam. Well, I mean, in public relations, our job is to build relationships with people. So we need to understand and think about how people relate to different experiences, how they relate to each other, and how they may relate to our brands or organizations. And for most people, we absolutely should work to understand what their cultural background is, right? Because culture is the way that we share our lives together as people, as groups. It's our set of ways that we experience and prefer things like food, how we dress, the music we like, the way we practice religion even can be part of our cultural experiences. And a lot of times, even how we dress. And for most people, we learn about culture and really kind of become adopted into cultural practices through our family of origin. So whatever family looks like to you, wherever you were brought up or how you were brought up, you learn about yourself and how to celebrate different holidays, how to express yourself as a brother, a sister, a child, right? By the messages and behaviors that you see shared with you as a child. And then as we grow as adults, we have that choice. And hopefully we broaden our perspective through different experiences and travel and work and engagements with others, so that we can actually opt in or opt out of different cultural practices and behaviors. I know that, for example, a funny little example is my daughter is 13. She'll be 14 later this summer. And when she was young, she hated avocado. I don't like avocado. Don't like avocado, right? And we have avocado a lot. And my husband's actually Caucasian or white. And he likes avocado, and he's part of the culture here in San Antonio, which is the largest Hispanic majority city in the US. So, having avocados around is pretty familiar for a lot of people because that became part of the popular culture of our city. And so for my daughter, rejecting avocado was like, how can you not like avocado, right? But as she grew older, she kind of opted in and said, I like that now. And so our preferences can change. And in terms of cultural practice, her understanding where or when she can put avocado on certain foods and with what meals, like, it's interesting just to play with that food as an example. But me just talking about avocado, Sam, you might be like, oh my God, I love avocado toast. And we start talking about, and we connect that way. And that has nothing to do with our race background or ethnic background, right? So there's a lot of ways that if we understood as PR pros or marketing pros, what cultural preferences our target audiences or stakeholders have, we can find very deep and emotionally beneficial ways to connect with them.
Absolutely. And it can mean things that I think maybe we're not even thinking about sometimes. Like this example you're sharing, like you said, it has nothing to do with a lot of things that come to mind when you think about cultural sensitivity or getting all of that messaging down with your target audience. It could be something like pop culture that actually brings the group you're communicating with together. So that is a pretty fun and great example, honestly.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
yeah.
I talk about pop culture because I like to walk our PR industry pros and our marketing pros, or just our communication pros, into these topics very strategically and sensitively, because it can be quite polarizing to start discussing or trying to work in this space when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? There's a lot of judgments all the way around on whether you're doing something right or not. Well, the real concept and understanding is, I think we should offer grace around the attempts. And when you can find a unifying connection, and culture offers us so many ways to connect, right? Food lights people up, different music lights people up, and we'll get into that. But pop culture is just a wonderful way to understand it. Absolutely. I mean, look at all the like 90s wear that's back. I can't believe like the young kids are, I'm like, these neon colors are back. I saw some whitewashed jeans and I was like, seriously.
Right.
And guess what? I knew them and we wore them, and that had nothing to do with me being Latina. And a lot of times pop culture, what's really popular in society at a certain decade or era, can transcend boundaries. So it's a great way to think about how can we kind of get over things that disconnect us and look for that unifying through chord.
That's a really great point. And also something that stands out to me that you said, and that kind of just spells a lot of confusion and hesitance, is just that culture is everything and should always have everything to do with PR and just it's the way our whole lives are arranged. So
Yeah.
it's not something that should just sometimes fit into your PR strategy. It's always a part of it, whether you're aware of it or not.
Exactly. And that's why I made that comment during the poll time, is that, you know, you've really worked in multicultural communication, whether you may be aware of that or not, because the people you're working with, if you look at the last census results, and those are already outdated, and that was with an undercount because not a lot of people, I mean, some people did not feel comfortable raising their hand and filling out that information. We won't get into why, but with that undercount, we know that the US, if we just look at the nation in the US, is more multicultural and multiracial than it's ever been in the history of census results. And that's wonderful. That means more types of people with different backgrounds are getting together, and there's more love going around. But that's not necessarily the messaging we're hearing, Sam. So it's our job to know the data so we can counter that messaging with real life stories and insights.
Right. Definitely. I completely agree with you. You've started to get into this about just what people really care about and figuring that out and leading from that place when you're working in multicultural communications. Something you often cover specifically is what exactly drives a news angle when we're talking about a multicultural lens, really, and overall PR strategy. So what exactly do you believe innately makes something newsworthy?
Yeah, I actually was organically kind of figured that out throughout my career through practice, right? Trial and error, pitching, hearing nothing back, pitching, landing a story. And I started noticing patterns. I know we talk about that a lot as PR pros are like, oh, if it bleeds, it leads. It's got to be tragic. It's got to be terrible. And certainly conflict is a high criteria for news because unfortunately, people have a negative bias and we pay more attention to bad things than good things, right? We got to work consciously to get over that too as humans. But I actually in the book and actually on my blog too list out, here are the 9 criteria for newsworthiness based on journalism culture. So how they practice and what they study. And I was so lucky that I taught a semester, and in the textbook, some researchers had outlined 8 of them, and I added 9. And I won't go through all of them here, but certainly conflict, like we talk about, novelty, right? We love to know the first ever, when something's inaugural or it is never before seen or brand new results. So newness, right? Or innovation is very exciting for people. And that's where I like this conversation, because if we're thinking about PR and we start intersecting those principles more with DEI or cultural strategy or tech, right? Look at all the chat GPT conversations going on. It adds that novelty to our profession and our lives, and people love that. Deviance too. So we'll get into like, when does cultural strategy go bad? And that was just a cultural expression too, right? How do we know what thumbs down means? That's funny. But yeah, when something is not the norm in a negative way, right? The big fires, unfortunately, like mass shootings, a parent that does something wrong to their child, those things make news. And as PR pros, we're also watching for some of the issues and crises that come up in our organizations, which a lot of them have to do with human behavior and, deviant behavior, right? Embezzlement, all kinds of scandals, and so a lot of what I talk about too is it's ended up being, Sam, like how to be a good person and human, because part of that helps us be better advisors and counselors, but then advise and counsel our clients too, that not only should they be great at their job, but they should act like a professional. And here's what that means, right? And they need to always think before they act and manage impulsivity. So those are some of the criteria top that get a lot of coverage. When it comes to culture or diversity, equity, inclusion, what gets coverage there? Same criteria, right? When something goes bad. So unfortunately in Texas, our governor's getting away with DEI. He has a DEI bill that's getting away with some DEI laws and policies around what they can and can't do at public universities. Well, yeah, that's making news. And then if there is a subject matter expert who wants to weigh in on that topic, pro or con, that's going to make news, right? So we can go further into that, but those are some examples.
Definitely. No, that was perfect. And I was especially curious to ask that as your book is very new, relatively, right? So it's interesting to even touch on this discussion, whereas many of these topics, if not all to an extent, have always been what makes something newsworthy. And it's, I guess, curious to analyze that over time, and especially as we see, if anyone's seen our barometer research reports, every quarter lately, over the past several, we see journalists respond to 3% of emails they're receiving from PR people. So in that environment, it's just so important that we understand what they're looking for and what that looks like from a multicultural lens, as we're talking about today. And people are, as you've discussed as well, really looking for more purpose-driven work and getting much more involved. It's such a sensitive atmosphere. So understanding that from a news angle is so vital for us. Examples, as you mentioned, this is one of the more fun parts of today. So as Melissa mentioned, you can mean well and do bad. You can not mean well and try to really hijack different cultural angles. There's all these different ways that multicultural PR strategy can express itself. And so I wanted to invite Melissa to walk us through a few examples she pulled and highlight what went right, what went wrong, and what we can be doing and what we can learn from it here.
Yeah, absolutely. So any of you pros can pull up, Google the background for all the details on these examples. But Sam had asked me, well, can you give us some examples of, when they use culture appropriately or inappropriately, like good and bad examples, right? And so I think this is kind of broken up. It's kind of all over the board. So I'll walk us through the photo of the sugar skulls here on the left. So what you see there, that's a good symbol for Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos. And one of the bad examples, and I'll do like this, of when they try to use culture and cultural strategy in developing something and it kind of went south for a bit. When Disney was developing the movie Coco, which now is very beloved, particularly in the Mexican community, Mexican American culture, but really across cultures, it really became a fan favorite. But when they were actually working on that film, they made quite a bit mistakes, right? Quite a bit of mistakes. One of the mistakes they made was they tried to trademark the term Dia de los Muertos or Day of the Dead. And people were not having that, right? Like you cannot, who's going to trademark Christmas? Like you can't trademark that term and you can't take over the holiday. And that's that term that we hear, appropriation, right? The taking of, or in some cases, the stealing of. So I really want PR pros to really stop using the word jacking. Like we should not be news jacking. We should not be trend jacking. Like don't steal anything, right? We can iterate or evolve or best practice or benchmark. But we want to be kind and share credit. And so that was obviously inappropriate by Disney. But then they did some course correction. When they were making the film, I think in the beginning, they weren't exactly working with the right experts on the origin story and the information that they were putting together that would shape and influence the film and the actual script. Then they started bringing in, especially after they got some public backlash, subject matter experts from the Mexican heritage that could actually create the music and help create the art and really inspire and write to the script. And that's what we should be doing. If we're trying to show some kind of cultural expression, we want to show appreciation, that we respect your community, we respect this cultural practice or music or heritage, and we want to work with the organizations that have a track record of doing right by that community, researching that community, giving funds, supporting that community, right? We don't want to just jump on the new trend and say, it was really cool to be Latino. Let's quick, throw some hot colors on something and make some money, because that's what happens. That's what happens with everything. Not on here, but I remember, I think it was last year, backlash. I think Walmart had an ice cream that was based on Juneteenth and put some colors on it, and that just did not hit right. But on our slide here too, Gwen Stefani most recently got some backlash and some public feedback about her comments saying, "I am Japanese." There was a reporter that was interviewing her, and they were talking about her past musical days. And she's like, I really related. I think it was, I struggle to say the right name, so please forgive me, but I think it's the Harry Juku girls, or and that experience. And I remember that album, and she was just talking about, she really said, "I am Japanese. I realized I am Japanese." Now, words mean everything in our business, right? And while I appreciate the fact that, she relates to that background and that culture, when you say "I am," that really becomes very powerful wording. So instead, if she had said, like, "I really relate to, or I respect, or I love the Japanese culture, I really appreciate the Japanese culture, I wanted to elevate the Japanese culture," that would make a lot more sense. So we just have to be very careful, especially for a lot of us who are the professional communicators for different organizations and brands, is to be very thoughtful about our words. And if, like me, right, you don't exactly have the right word, but you want to point to it, just ask for that grace, own that, hey, this may not be the right word, but here's where I'm trying to take you. I think that really matters in our messaging. And the last kind of tough example was Victoria's Secret. I wish I gave you the photo, but it's pretty painful. In one of their runway shows, they had a beautiful model come down the runway in a very small bikini and a Native American chief headdress. And that is a sacred cultural artifact in the Native American communities, right? That is not something to dress up in that way. And so that gave them a whole lot of feedback too. So that is one photo I actually show quite a bit to organizations. I show them that photo and like, look, this illustrates the feeling of appropriation. And then I show a photo of a Native American Indigenous dancer at an Indigenous Peoples Day celebration in her respective attire. And you get to see the vast difference, right? When you're working with that community versus kind of making a caricature of them, right?
So of course. And that makes me think about what you started off with saying about just working with I wouldn't want to say the right people, but in a way, the right people that are truly understanding and getting the real narrative down from who you are trying to connect with or promote and whatnot. And we even see a lot of what you mentioned about just go ahead and jumping on trends when it comes to Pride this past month. I mean, that's just the classic month where you see everything turn rainbow, and it begs the question, what's actually going on here? Who's actually supporting this? So
exactly, Sam. We always want to look at our organization and say, well, what's really behind, underneath that hood, right? Are you really supportive of this community? Or are you just jumping on something to make a dollar or try to get some attention for yourself? On the right side of the slide, we have some of the good examples of cultural strategy and when we're really respecting the community and elevating their offerings and who they are. So if anyone has not seen the movie Flaming Hot yet, like, go watch Flaming Hot. It's inspirational for everybody. Just the idea that someone can come up from, being a janitor to developing this product that's, well loved and made a lot of money, right? And that's inspiring in itself, no matter what your background is. But I really love how the director Eva Longoria and the writers that they have and the actors that they have, like, everything feels so authentic. It feels so real. Like, the second I started watching it, I was like, yeah, like, I understand that story. And while that gentleman lived in a different part of the US, and in that experience, even our geographical differences can have cultural ramifications, right? Someone that lives in South Texas may have a very different style of dress, the way they speak, the accent they have. versus someone in North Texas where the twang's a little, more, right? A little more y'all, or East Texas, West Texas. Texas is like its own country in some ways because it's so big. But if we even think about how we speak English differently in New York versus, right, California, you can get the idea. But Flaming Hot had a lot of good universal themes. I think that they honored some of the adversity that different Latinos may live through going to schools that they are a true minority part of the population. They may have some language differences. They may have some classism or just money differences, right? And I like that they were honest about that. And they showed some of the negative things that can happen when you are kind of repressed, but then how you can motivate yourself to move out of that. But it was in English, right? An English dominant film, which a lot of times we have to fight for that in Hollywood, that we don't all speak Spanish, or we don't have to all have very heavy accents. So it demystified a lot of things without being so overt about it. So I thought it was really, really clever and helpful for our community. And then the Smithsonian's on the right, that's a photo of actually my son. We were checking out the Latino exhibit, the Latino Museum that's coming into Washington, D.C. through the National Smithsonian Association Institute. And so they've been working on that for a little bit while, compiling data. They've got a great website that's helpful for anyone looking into information on Latino, Hispanic communities. But they now have the Molina Family Latino Gallery. And it's exciting because actually right now it's housed in the American History Museum. And so I wrote my column for the Public Relations Society of America. And while in one way I could look at that, or someone could look at that and say, hey, that's not fair, that's not right. Why don't we have our own standalone museum? Why is it taking it so long? Because Latinos are the largest minority population in the US, right? We could absolutely go there. But when I thought about it a different way, I realized I really am happy this is inside the American History Museum, because it makes it more of a mainstream conversation that we are part of American history, right? So I think that they're honoring that culture in that space. It shouldn't take as long, right, to get what we need to have that part of the narrative. But that's the work that we can do as pros to help push that along. So that's the work I'm trying to help with. But I love how they really honor the different contributions. And it just seemed like every other part of American history stories.
Right. And like you mentioned, it puts things less in a box, like bringing them together like that really just takes away that notion that there should be something separate for this one thing. Like it's all part of the same thing at times. And I think sometimes there's an urge to separate more than necessary, maybe even.
Yeah, that's a huge point.
Yeah.
That's a huge point, Sam. I'm glad you bring that up, because I also want to offer that up and say it is very natural for humans to categorize things. Like our brains have a natural wiring, because we still have these cave people brains, to look for differences and safety, right? And which tribe or group, where do I belong? Belonging is a top value around the world. And it's really important that we do more conscious work to override our natural system of wanting to segregate and separate and categorize and box up people, and look for that connection.
100%, right? In groups and out groups, it's the first thing we start to learn there. So it really stays with us, whether we intend for it or not.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for walking us through those. That was very helpful and getting your perspective on those different issues. And I've not seen that movie, so maybe I'll have to go out and watch it. It sounds worth a watch.
That was good.
Awesome. All right, let's get into some more buzz terms. Something I really like about these sorts of topics there are just so many terms and phrases that people are afraid to say, but feel the need to say and get involved with, like DE&I. There's so much polarizing conversation around who's doing what for that and what it means and what's appropriate, what's not. So let's talk a little bit about what you have in your book here. This is actually an image from Melissa's book. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that to get us going and discuss where DE&I actually fits into cultural strategy.
Yeah.
So to start us off, Melissa, you discuss this heavily, and I know you're a certified diversity professional. So what actually inspired you to earn a special certification in diversity in the first place?
Yeah, well, thanks. I was inspired to go after and officially get the certification as an external type of social proof that organizations and brands and individuals could trust that I have been doing the work and I'm committed to continued learning to do the work in this space. So sometimes, talking about boxing, right? Sometimes people categorize us visually and say, you're Black, so you must understand what's going on with this whole Black Lives Matter, right? Or you're Latino, so you must speak Spanish, or you must, and all these musts other us in certain ways, but can limit us. And I had worked in a diversity and inclusion department for a corporation. And for me, I stepped into that space as a public relations pro who had done multicultural PR and marketing before. And I thought, well, I can transition into diversity and inclusion, and it's really multicultural PR plus, right? And for the most part, it absolutely is, because really it's just about how are we relating to people? And DEI is that practice of really showing that tailoring and ultimate sensitivity and inclusion and respect for others. And for a lot of us, it's a lot of ways that we can do social good. But to your point, Sam, there's a lot of polarizing voices around it. And so when I worked in DEI proper and went to some of the diversity trade associations and whatnot, there were absolutely practitioners that were a little more on the human resources camp. It's usually housed under human resources, HR, not PR. And that's a different point of view than a public relations pro. And so I would see that there was a lot of scorecarding, right? And ways that they were trying to measure things that, wow, that's a little difficult to measure that societal impact in some ways. And it wasn't always as long-term as you need to when you work with people, as we know in PR. So I wanted to get certified recently because I wanted to continue talking about what I was learning about in my columns, what I was learning about based on Pew Research Center's data, not someone's opinion, right? We hear a lot of very loud voices, and those often can be polarizing on one side or the other, but most of the data shows that most, like Americans, we live in the middle. We're kind of make decisions on a case-by-case basis. We vote a lot depending on the individual. We don't hear that. We don't read that because that's not conflict-oriented, right? But it gave me a lot of peace to say, yeah, most people want to do good. Most people want to respect and support others. Most people should learn about this, and that'll make our world better. So I thought certifying would help me be able to share the message in a way that people might hear with a trusted ear a little bit better. And so in the book, I start the DEI journey for communication pros because the principles of that, some parts of it can be a nuanced, and some principles are just, how to build good rapport with people, right? And good relationships with people. I walk us into DEI through culture because we can understand that, and it seems a little less scary, quite honestly. But I made this model as my first of two models I share in the book to talk about, look, if you do the good practice of PR, you're working to build relationships. You're being that ethical advisor. You're saying, you can't do everything you want to do or you feel like doing, top leader, right? For example. And you're doing proactive strategic marketing communication. So you're sending messages intentionally through a variety of channels, and you're figuring out where your audience and stakeholders appreciate being communicated with, and you're doing that on purpose. And so those are some tenets of PR. But some tenets of DEI, like appreciating, understanding people's differences, and then working to leverage them, right, as assets to your organization, providing resources when you need to bridge some gaps, right? I mean, just as a worker, look, I'm sitting in a chair right now. I'm 5'1". I'm short. I need a little bolster to put my feet on, right? So I need some accommodations in a simple manner, right? To bridge my gap of me being able to sit here comfortably and work. So there's a lot of ways that we do that, but that's a simple example. And then we're also working intentionally to get over those cave people brains and be welcoming, trying to hire with more of that diversity lens, saying, do we have all the same type of people in this room, whether that's ethnic backgrounds or industry, right, points of view? They're all marketers. We don't have one PR person there. Oh, we did a campaign that was insensitive. Well, we didn't even think about it. Well, yeah, right. So you need diverse minds and points of view and lived experiences. And then when we actually hire them, are we including them in these vital decision-making conversations in the campaign, shaping campaigns, and not just giving them assignments or, checking a box? Because everyone wants to be comfortable. And so sometimes the discrimination we feel is that someone just feels awkward around us because we're not like them. Right. And that's where that cultural connection really helps, is finding that light point. But if you do the principles or the tenets of PR, on your dark purple side and your DEI and the light purple side, like those actually intersect and build good, strong, deep relationships is what we want, right? Long-term customers and stakeholders that are going to be with you through good and bad, through pandemic or not, right? Goodwill, all brands benefit from goodwill because brands are made of people and organizations are made of people, and people make mistakes. Someone's going to mess up somewhere, right? Whether they took a long time getting your food out or, there was a big embezzlement, like people can cause issues. And so we manage some issues and build goodwill around the brand, which is totally a PR, right, point of view and practice. We want to manage our reputations, which means we're thinking about cultural strategy and appropriateness. Are people feeling respected, heard, included? So it's just a little deeper of a work, I think, as we think about ourselves as PR pros. And all that connects very well to be a more sustainable organization for communities that keep evolving and changing, terminology and words that keep evolving and changing, and sentiment that keeps changing.
Absolutely. And just covering a topic like this today, I mean, October was really just a few months ago at this point. It can be very complicated connecting with your own audience, even in your efforts to simplify and educate and whatnot. And you've mentioned that you've gotten sometimes mixed feedback about some of your concepts and what you work on and to communicate here. So I'd actually be curious to hear about mitigating some of that too, and what some of that kind of mixed feedback has looked like, and how you've been able to handle that on such sensitive subject matter, of course.
Yeah, and I think what you're probably alluding to is that, people still make mistakes, right? I've been in experiences where, look, we're all going to feel, we all have leverage. I like that a little bit more than the word privilege, right? We all have leverage in some rooms and opportunities and backgrounds, and we are othered or don't feel like we are enough, or we feel like we're on the outside of different experiences or groups or people. And I think the work that I've been trying to personally do as an author, that's an identity piece that I really struggled with, was because I didn't know anyone who really was an author, not anyone close to me in my family, not anyone in my immediate network. And I was just really driven and called to share what I was learning, because I thought it was so helpful during the pandemic, in a time where everyone was so hurt and raw and nervous and scared of what's the way forward. And there was such great silver linings of people collaborating and sharing resources and tools, and some of these, imaginary walls we put up between ourselves, even between PR pros and journalists, kind of came down. So I love that connectivity, and I really wanted to talk more about that. But, people are going to make mistakes. We're going to get those microaggressions and comments about, all kinds of things. So since I've become an author, for example, in the PR industry, I talk a lot about in the book is I want to progress and welcome all types of pros into the industry and communication in these conversations. So we need to do a lot of work because our numbers don't reflect the community we live in. The majority of PR pros, if by stats, are going to be from the white community. And majority of all people of color in total are only 24% of the industry. People like me who identify as Latino or Latina or Hispanic are about 10.5%. And then, it goes down from there. And when people of color in the industry take half of that amount, and those are the leaders. Now, I've never really run into an overt, hard ceiling, right? But there have been times where it's like, what's the problem here? And I think that's the hard work we need to do, is figure out where is there some red tape or a barrier or a misnomer? What's that challenge, and how do we get over it? So this is really a lot of education to kind of go upstream from some of those things and go, okay, here's how you work with what you got and the body you were born into and the one you're living in, right? Because there's parts of me that, I'm not going to change, and I'm not going to be able to change either, even if I wanted to. So I think it's more about making sure that your acumen and how you practice is stellar, and then moving around the barriers that you have in front of you. So I give a lot of those examples. And when people do step on my toes because they make comments about, oh, Sam, I had, I was signing books at a conference, PR pros, and somebody was talking to me, and I got a couple comments, mostly from the, more senior, which were leadership level, white pros, where it felt a little bit of a head pat, right? It felt a little bit of like, oh, atta girl, or I had someone go, felicidades. And we were speaking English just like we're speaking English. So it felt inappropriate. That was inappropriate and wild as that probably felt to y'all right now. Like, where did that come from, right? Patronizing, right? Doesn't feel good. Like, okay. Some, who were white and we were speaking English, tried to speak Spanish to me. I'm speaking English. The book's in English. My marketing materials are in English. Like, why are you bringing that in right now? Especially since I don't speak fluent Spanish, it becomes like a shame point. Like, what? Somebody asked me what Native American tribe I was part of. They talk about my height. They talk about I don't look old enough. They talk about they have more experience than I do. Good for you. Would you like to talk about what's in this book? And I just bridge them back into a positive conversation. I tried to, I talk about it. So hopefully that they and show some grace, right? Because they were trying to interact. So that's the point I focus on, is the attempt, because they were uncomfortable, but they were making an effort. So that's what I'm asking us to think about, is when you get those moments, do the good work of, you are diversifying the industry just by your representation. For some of us, I will be that representative, right? I'm not going to let myself feel like a token. I'm going to open that door and bring more with me. I'm going to give grace to allies in any form or fashion they come in, and we're going to move forward.
Yes. And one of the first things that I thought of immediately in the kind of Spanish English example is, who knows, but I imagine that person had no idea what that would make you feel like, or just what kind of, maybe they even thought, oh, this is going to go really well. She's going to appreciate this attempt, whatever it is. People can really get it so wrong when they're trying. And I'm not here to advocate at all for whatever that situation was, but it's just so interesting to see how many different directions attempts can go in as people are learning and getting accustomed. So it's just demonstrating the importance here. And to your question, who wants to actually talk about this book rather than all of those different things?
What I look like.
Yes. We would like to talk about the book. So as we wrap up today, just for the few more minutes here, we want to get into just a couple more questions to dive into the deep ends of this book. Most importantly to you, I would imagine, is what inspired it in the first place. I guess you touched on it a little bit, just with your background and your goals to connect and change the industry and the world. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Just what brought you here?
Yeah. It's a long story, and I actually have a whole podcast episode about the origin story, and it is kind of mystical and magical because I really believe it was a calling. It was a calling when I was praying during a really bad part of the pandemic. It was probably that May of 2020 when we was like, okay, my kindergartner's not going back, and my fifth grader's not finishing her year in elementary, and we were all kind of, it was devastating. We were scared of this invisible virus that could be in the air right next to me right now. And it was a really trying time for a lot of our clients, owning this kind of business, being in the industry. I know all of y'all know that. But when I was praying for the right words to keep motivating myself and figuring out, like, because terms mattered like tenfold, right? Even like the word essential. If you put that in front of an organization, all of a sudden they were allowed to operate. Like, words mattered so much. I was praying for the right inspiration and words, and these phrases were coming to me. And I have a creative writing background, how I kind of walked into PR. So I was like, well, okay, let me just write these down on my phone because maybe they'll be helpful in a press release or a statement or something, right? We were writing so many things during that time. And as I wrote them, I kind of scrolled up and down, and I'm like, this is the outline for a friggin' book. I was like, and then I was like, I'm in church, but I was still like, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? Like, I don't have time for this right now. Like, I am struggling just to get through the day. But the book kept coming to me, kept coming up in my mind. I just put it away. And then I ran into and heard from an author, a Latino author, when our Hispanic journalists chapter here was brave enough to hold a gala that September that year. And I was hearing Shea Serrano, and he was talking about, hey, look, the industry is only 4% Latino authors. So if you have a book in you, you need to write it. I was like, oh my gosh, and it really did hit me, Sam, like I could die. And everything I learned the hard way in PR and my industry, I never got to share with so many people I really wish I had time to mentor, and my children, right? At least I could leave them know how to work in this industry if they don't find their way into another one. So I wanted something that was just straight talk, really easy to understand. I had been running the podcast by then as part of my marketing efforts, right, during a pandemic where you couldn't go places. And this concept of smart talk of, let's just have some real honest conversation that's deep, that gets us somewhere, helps us learn something. We talk about the hard, tricky things, and we learn from each other as pros. So I felt very inspired to continue that. And I do love writing. So getting it down was pretty amazing, how it poured out of me in about 13 weeks. A lot of it using talk to text while walking the dog. Sometimes crying because it was a pandemic and a lot of us walked and cried, right, to get through everything. But I wanted to get into, what are the unwritten rules of PR? Like, what if you were a student like me who didn't have a PR major and you got into this field? Especially if you were a first generation college graduate and you expected that a degree equaled a job. I didn't want you to realize the hard way, like I did, that that's not necessarily how the equation goes. You have to have experience, right? So I wanted to unpack like what a trade association is, how to get started, what really works in media relations, where I think we should go with DEI and cultural strategy, how you can do social responsibility by yourself or with an organization, and how not to mess up your career and let your clients hopefully mess up theirs, right? So I wanted people to really understand in very straight talk how this all worked and bridge a gap between classroom and then real life experience. But then you have journalists who transition every day into the field, and some of them just really focus on media relations, and then they get in and realize, I don't know how to write a strategic communication plan. I don't know a lot about marketing, right? I don't know about DEI, and I'm being asked to do all these things. So I knew journalists who feel like when they got into PR, they were failing. When I talk about in the book, that felt like they were failing every day. So they went back to the newsroom. So I want them to feel welcome in the industry too. And then of course, if you're in marketing or advertising, you should have that public relations point of view on the work that you do. And so I talk about how to just get that point of view and how to think through different campaigns, no matter where you sit. So I really wanted to be inclusive, and I was very careful with design and all that. So it didn't feel like it was for one box of people. And we also have an audiobook out now too, in case, look, written words hard to sit down with for a lot of us who are writing and busy all day, but you can wash your dishes and listen to it. And all this is on Amazon. And it's a love letter and a legacy leave behind and a pandemic silver lining blanket for you all.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a very
Yeah.
powerful and personal um, journey around this, so that makes it even better. And of course, we're a little short on time. It seems like we
Sure.
could talk forever about this, and I would love to, but I respect everyone's time, so I'll scoot us forward a little bit. We wanted to cover a few more details from the book and just talk a bit more about it, but unfortunately, we are wrapping up. So like Melissa said, you can access this all over the place, whether it be on Amazon or somewhere else, but that is at your disposal. And PR tips for the road. This is something we just like to go over. If there's any lasting summary of what you'd like to share with the audience from what we've covered, reminders, tips, tricks to bring it all together, we like to run through this right before a few question moments.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say real quickly, right? It's all about think before you do, right? So good work should come before good PR or marketing messaging. So if your organizations are, we all know, right? We know leaders that are like, they're not the best person or whatever. We all know when it's a mess. So make sure that the in-house operational, logistical people messes are actually paid attention to before you step out and try to get very loud about what a good corporate citizen your organization is or whatnot. So always think before you do, right? Take that beat and pause, look for the right word and the right action. But other than that, Sam, I'd love, if there's a question or two we can fit in, I'm happy to stay on.
Sure. All right. Well, we actually, so far, we haven't gotten any live, but now, as I mentioned, now is a chance for if anyone wants to ask myself or Melissa anything from what we've covered today. If you're curious about resources, what you can do next, I'm sure we'd both be happy to help you. You can reach out to the Propel team with this email here if you'd like. Melissa, if you want to share any contact information again, the chat for people to get in touch with you. This is also a great time for that. Yeah, thank you all for being here. This was such a great conversation. I'm excited for more people to get out there and read your book. Congrats again.
Thank you. Any tough questions? I love a good tough question. I'll give you one last.
Put her on the spot. Now's your chance for a live answer. We get anything here? Otherwise, I mean, from my end, anyone new to Propel, like I mentioned, we have new AI tools, that being a pitch writer and a media list builder. So controversial. We talk about the ethics around it all the time. We have AI webinars once a month. If that interests you, we can get you on the mailing list. All right, we've got it. What is the best way to connect culturally with newsrooms and news orgs? How do you dive into them and find the connections?
I love that. I think, okay, so just in general, one, make sure you actually are including what people say are niche, right, outlets. So whether they serve the Black community or a certain side of your city or town, or whether they're Spanish media, they all need important information. So I think most of us know we need to tailor our pitches based on the outlet, like what they cover, when they cover news and how they cover news, but then also straight to journalists, what they like to cover, what their beats are. You don't know someone personally, I wouldn't go, hit them with some kind of cultural point, right? That's kind of like saying, Alicia, that is Melissa, right? Just because you see my last name and think, okay, I think she's Latina, I'm going to throw in like gracias or something. Don't go there, right? Talk to them as people first, use people's first names. They love that. Research shows that we love our names. Figure out what they like to cover. And that's the cultural point to connect to, right? That's what you share in common, is that either you have that resource or that SME or someone they can talk to in the space. But for them, that's their pop culture right there. I cover education. Talk to me about education clients and stories, right? So we have to do our research into the human. So you get your list from Propel, for example. A lot of times I'll go to their Twitters. Like the journalists are all over Twitter, and you can learn about them and by seeing what they tweet and what they share. And they often have their own websites or have their emails there too, if something's missing. So actually do that extra step to learn more about that person if you can, for that individual to report or pitch, and that's going to help you connect with them. And most of the time, I'll tell you, these smaller community newspapers, they're just so grateful for the inclusion, right? Some people go, well, when do I go to Spanish media? And I'm like, look, if you're a municipality and what you have to say is important to English speakers, you're going to close down a major highway. The grid's going to go down. There's no electricity for a couple hours. I'm pretty sure Spanish speakers need to know that too. I'm pretty sure, right? People from different communities need to know that too. So just think a little broader about that, and I think it'll really help.
Absolutely. That is something we've covered in previous webinars, is it just might not be an issue for one group. A lot of times we are talking about situations and implications that are for everyone, and you can get in all kinds of outlets you're not even considering pitching, and we need to be thinking like that with these response rates and maximizing our potential. I mean, even as PR pros, to communicate with everyone and to not miss opportunities to truly connect in ways we're not thinking about. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Melissa. This was amazing. Yeah, thank you all for being here. We'll send out the recording afterwards, and it was great to see you all, or have you all in our presence.
Thank you all. Take care.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye.